All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. It's an educational channel. We usually check out great theories of everything, ancient and modern, all-encompassing theories, grand unified theories, earth-shattering discoveries, magnum opuses, tour de forces, and generally emanating from obscure sources. We do this, so that you can become aware of things that you might not otherwise, and they can affect your life in profound ways. Help you with your paradigm shifting, your awakening to 5D consciousness, and your formation of a holistic worldview. Your quest for better spiritual, mental, and physical health. Today's our 202nd video that we've done entitled The Reciprocal Church, where we're attempting to put together spiritual resources that you can use in your own life, especially after you've recognized that the Western religions are defunct because they have collapsed under their own weight of propaganda and lies. In particular, we've been going over the New Testament and trying to learning how to decode the language there, and particularly where did this thing come from? Most Christians spend their time learning how to quote the Bible chapter and verse. They don't spend enough time reading the whole thing, and they certainly don't spend enough time trying to figure out, where did this come from? Because if they did, they would figure out very quickly that it was written by the Romans, the Caesars, or at least under the auspices of the Caesars. In particular, the Flavian dynasty of Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian, who Vespasian was the father, and Titus and Domitian are the two sons. They all became emperors or Caesars from between 69 and 96 AD or CE. And they employed as their court historian someone named Josephus. And Josephus was said to be a Jew, but I had the hypothesis that he never existed, and that I called it Team Josephus. But whoever Team Josephus is, he not only wrote the Wars of the Jews and the Antiquities of the Jews, but he also wrote the Gospels, because, or probably more than that, of the New Testament, because they parallel each other. They satire or they parody each other. When you read them together, they kind of fit together. And so, to the point where some Christian sects actually include Josephus in their canon of the Bible. Even today, the preterists have Josephus as a book of their Bible, because the prophecies that Jesus made in the New Testament are fulfilled by the Emperor Titus, or at least some character named Titus, in the Wars of the Jews. So, right now we're reading a book that is called, it's really not a book, it's kind of like a booklet, pamphlet, The True Authorship of the New Testament. And this author is named Abelard Rushlin, if you're pronouncing that correct, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this goes all the way back to 1971, much earlier than a lot of the, obviously the stuff today, from Joseph Atwill's Caesar the Messiah from 2005, Michael Menescot's just put out a book here last year, at the end of last year. But this is an OG, and this guy did a lot of digging to dig this up. But he claims that the New Testament was written by Arius Calpurnius Piso and his family. And he also went by the name of Josephus. So I was right about the Josephus part, or the team Josephus, but I didn't know who the identity was, but he makes some very earth-shattering discoveries here. He really dug into this by reading a lot of the letters that were written by many of the Roman so-called intellectuals of the time, and recognizing that, you know, everybody that was writing books back then was royalty. They were all part of the Roman Empire, you know, part of the Caesars. And they told each other such in their correspondence, private correspondence with each other. So, for example, Pliny the Younger has a lot of letters that he wrote that have been dug up and now are, you know, you can buy, or you can get volumes of his letters. Same with Tacitus. Same with Seneca. And he read all this stuff in the original languages, which was usually Greek, sometimes Latin, and also Hebrew. I believe he reads all three of those languages in the ancient. And by doing so, painstakingly pieced together all of the different aliases that Arius Piso wrote under, which were numerous, but included Josephus, including the Gospels. And his family wrote most of the rest of it, along with Pliny. And we're in, I think, part 7, which is called The Creation of the Church. And we've just gone through a couple paragraphs here. We're right here. He's talking about the martyrdom of Stephen that occurs in Acts 7. And the martyrdom of Stephen is a posthumous honor to Stephanas, the slave of Domitilla, who was Emperor Domitian's niece, who had helped kill the emperor in Rome, along with Piso. So Piso / Josephus was banished by Domitian in 82 AD, just after Domitian took the throne, after he killed Titus, his brother, which, at least according to Roman Piso's sources, he says that Domitian had Titus killed. Don't know. He's the first person I've seen who said that. But anyway, Stephanas was a slave of Domitilla. Domitilla is recognized as being one of the first Christians, and she founded, or whatever, started these catacombs in Rome where all of the, you know, most famous Christians are buried. But all of these Flavians, that's the dynasty of these Romans, they were the first Christians because they were worshiping themselves. Titus and Vespasian were the gods of this religion, not Jesus. Jesus was the prophet of. He prophesied that Titus would come. Titus is the second coming, but the second coming was in 70 AD. Jesus was a fictional character that was written backwards into history so that he would prophesy things to historicize or to legitimate what Titus was doing. So tight, so they run parallel. Every place that Jesus goes, Titus goes. Or to put it the opposite way, every place that Titus went, Jesus also went. Everything that Titus did, Jesus prophesied in parabolic language or symbolic language. Emperor Domitian, who helped, Stephen becomes the gentle Stephen, whom the Jewish mob stones. But Acts does not state he died, but only that he fell asleep. It's in verse 60 of chapter 7. For he was in fact killed in Rome by those not involved in the plot who rushed in, presumably Domitian's bodyguards. So Stephanus was trying to kill Domitian under the auspices of Domitilla, the niece of Domitian, who was staging an assassination plot. There's one assassination plot after another with these first century Romans. But so then once Domitian was killed, then this guy Nerva came in. Roman Piso suggests that Nerva is Tacitus. But regardless of whoever he is, he allows Arius Piso to do pretty much whatever. Arius Piso is kind of like the co-emperor behind the scenes, which he was also for Titus and Titus and Vespasian, but not Domitian. Domitian banished him. Nero, who was before all of them, executed his father. Possibly for writing the Gospels, he wrote what's called Ur Marcus, which is the proto-Mark, which is known as Q. Okay, back to the text. I've read a whole paragraph so far. 2 years later, in 98, Nerva dies and Trajan becomes emperor. He was married to Pompeia Plotina. Her true name was Claudia Phoebe. She was Piso's daughter. So now Trajan is Piso's son-in-law. The family now ruled the world. Acts was soon finished, and the epistles were being written by the same family. Between 100 and 105, while they were writing the New Testament epistles and the Gospel of John, and the purpose of the epistles was basically to spread out Christianity from just Jews to everybody, mostly slaves, within the Roman Empire. So, New Testament epistles and the Gospel of John. The Pisos were creating the embryonic church. Justus, his father, Pliny, their family, friends, and their slaves traveled about Bithynia, Pontus, and the province of Asia. All of these are in Turkey. And the Greek cities and later Alexandria, Egypt, and elsewhere, to create the churches and to gather the slaves and poor people into the new faith. So what they would do is the Gospels were they were plays. They would put on plays where Piso would play Jesus, and he would also play Joseph. And his sons would play the apostles. And there were other characters that were written in also. But they would read these things out loud to the slaves who didn't know how to read. So this was kind of like, the television of the day or whatever. As the public writings under Piso's name of Josephus, coupled with the synoptic gospels, are the method to find him as the creator of the Jesus story. So are the writings of Pliny, both the public and private ones, the method to glimpse the creation of the church. From the letters of Pliny the Younger, one can unravel the members of the Piso family under their various pseudonyms and can notice the comings and goings of the family across Bithynia and the adjacent provinces. From the letters of St. Ignatius, which are also by Pliny, one can see him writing to the various family members and friends as they start the first churches. Pliny created the first churches in Bithynia and Pontus, commencing about 100, once Acts of the Apostles was completed. But that was not the first tour of duty there, nor did his tour cover a mere few years, ending about 112, as is presumed from his public writings. He was in Pontus and Bithynia repeatedly between the years 85 and 112. The method to deduce his many tours is the appearance of his pseudonym, Maximus, repeatedly with various second names in his public letters. From his letters, he appears as Terentius Maximus, procurator for Emperor Domitian in Bithynia, and he was there even back in 85 as proconsul under the name Lapius Maximus. All the careers of various people named Maximus, each of which was Pliny, appear in his own public letters. This leads us to the source of the first name of Pontius Pilate. He, in fact, was named merely Pilate, or Pilatos in Greek. He was only Pilate when Philo of Alexandria discussed him about the year 45 in his writings. He mentioned him only in connection with the incident of the shields. Now, either Reuchlin or Roman Piso claims that Philo Judaeus, Philo of Alexandria, was also Arius Piso, another pseudonym. Pilate remained merely that in the first two Gospels, Matthew and Mark. Only in Luke 3, verse 1, does Pilate acquire the additional name Pontius. That was because in 85 to 90, when Luke was being written, after Matthew and Mark had been written, Pliny was assisting Piso writing the third Gospel. So Piso honored him by adding the name Pontius, which was a variant form of Pliny's province, Pontus, to Pilate's name. For Pliny had already been serving a term as governor there. Later, twice more, Pilate is called Pontius Pilate in Acts 4, verse 27, written after 96 by Justus, and then in 1 Timothy 6, verse 13, which Pliny himself wrote, about 105. The family also slipped into Acts in connection with the purported travels of Paul and others, mention of Pontus in Acts 2:9, and of Bithynia in Acts 16:7. Piso, as a fictional Jew named Aquila, is born in Pontus, according to Acts 18, verse 2, and the first verse in 1 Peter mentions the believers in Pontus and in Bithynia. Pliny's letters show that Justus too, Justus is Arius Piso's son, Justus too was in Bithynia between 96 and 98. He was proconsul there under the name Tullius Justus. Piso also shows his presence in these provinces and also via Pliny's letters. As Claudius Ariston, he was the leading citizen of Ephesus. That was the chief city in the province of Asia, located southwest of Bithynia. As Archippus, the philosopher, Piso had been honored by Emperor Domitian. The emperor commended him to Pliny in Bithynia, and he ordered Pliny to buy him a farm near Prusa. And the people of Prusa voted him as Archippus a statue. Now, so this is, I think, his banishment. Domitian banished him there by appointing him as the whatever, the proconsul or whatever. Dio Chrysostom, Bithynian orator and philosopher, addressed the city assembly of this same Prusa in Bithynia, lauding Diodorus, but with equivocal meanings. Diodorus meant the gift of God, by which Dio meant Piso. Well, certainly Roman Piso says that Dio Chrysostom was Arius Piso, perhaps Diodorus as well. Starting shortly after the year 100, and as they were finishing Acts and writing the epistles, they were traveling about the provinces. They pretended to be present-day apostles and bishops, the successors of the apostles Paul and Peter, who they explained had lived and written a half-century before. While Pliny pretended he was Ignatius, Justus was Justinus, Julius was Clement of Rome, Proculus was Polycarp, and Julianus, Justus's son, was Papias. I don't know if that's Pappus. I don't think so. They were reading for the slaves and poor people who were the new believers, the Synoptic Gospels, Acts, and also the Pauline epistles, which they were just finishing. But they were explaining that these had been written back before the middle of the prior century. However, Christianity was not done in a corner, as the words attributed to Paul in Acts 26:26. And 26 is one of Piso's numbers, so they would sign their names through their numbers a lot of times as well as through these pseudonyms. The intelligent of that day, the literate and upper classes, both in Rome and in all the conquered provinces around the empire who profited from Rome's rule and supported it, knew what was occurring. About the time that Justus and his father and Pliny were starting the first churches in Bithynia, Dio Chrysostom in Bithynia grumbled, quote, "Surely you have noticed what some of our booksellers do, because they, knowing that old books are in demand, since better written and on better paper, bury the worst specimens of our day in grain, in order that they may take on the same color as the old ones. And after ruining the books, into the bargain, they sell them as old." End quote. By the year 110, the New Testament, including the Pauline epistles, was substantially finished. All the books had been written except Revelation and Hebrews. There had been difficulty with some Roman writers. Valerius Martial, although using pseudonyms for the Pisos, mocked and derided them, as he did most everyone else in Rome's aristocracy other than Emperor Domitian. His closeness to the emperor permitted this, but after Trajan's accession in 98, Pliny graciously paid for Martial's passage back to his well-deserved retirement in his native Spain. Interesting. Now, I think that Roman Piso has a little bit of a different take on Martial, Valerius Martial. Juvenal, the satirist, too, criticized the Pisos under their various pseudonyms. In his 16th satire, which he addressed to Gallius, a pseudonym of Pisos, he grumbled at the privileges enjoyed by Rome's legions. Later, the Piso's successors would truncate his writings, appropriately at the 60th line of his said 16th satire, which are two of Piso's other numbers. Other writers were cooperative. for there was peril in non-cooperation. No one wrote unless he was permitted by the emperor. The latter and the aristocracy were the financial patrons of the writers. Thus, Statius, the poet, had written admiringly to the various members of the family during Domitian's reign. Later, after the year 100, appeared the writings of Plutarch. Piso was his patron, and the family were his friends. He was not 100% convinced, but he was cautious. He wrote, now, I'm pretty sure that Plutarch was definitely Piso, but he's not really divulging that right here. But he wrote, after dinner, even common unlettered people allow their thoughts to wander to other pleasures. They take up conundrums and riddles, or the names and numbers game. End quote. The names and numbers game was called in Greek isopsepha, something like that. ISOPSEPHA. The total values of a name's letters was equated with the total letters of another name. That was precisely what the Pisos were doing with small numbering. And that is what Plutarch was hinting at. By the year 115, the success of the Pisos' creation seemed assured. Thus far, only Josephus himself had dared to historicize Jesus, and that only in a brief paragraph, the Testimonium Flavianum in his Jewish Antiquities about the year 90. That's where you probably know Josephus from, is that all Christians, when you tell a Christian that there is no evidence for the existence of Jesus other than the Bible, they'll say, oh, he was cited in Josephus. Josephus says that he existed also. They might even tell you that Tacitus says the same thing. But what they don't do is they don't figure out who Josephus actually was, or who Tacitus actually was, or what they said, because both of those authors are actually excellent evidence for the non-existence of Jesus, as opposed to the opposite. If you actually dug into those sources, they would convince you that Jesus doesn't exist. But if you just cite their names and you don't know anything about them, then they bolster the case of Jesus having existed. Also, Josephus mentions briefly the purported death of Jesus' brother James in his history. Of course, Philo of Alexandria now it looks like in this pamphlet there's a couple lines that have been skipped between page 16 and 17, so we'll just skip to the next sentence, or the next sentence, because Philo of Alexandria, with the incident of the Roman shields, which I'm not familiar with that, did not, nor could he make any mention of Jesus nor the Christian story. Now, the family had other writers place Jesus and Christianity in prior history. First, the Pisos used their friend Cornelius Palma, the jurist, writing under the name Cornelius Tacitus between 115 and 120. He mentioned Christ and said that he had founded the Christians and had been crucified under Pilate, and also detailed that Nero had caused the Christians to be torn by dogs and burned on crosses, which also isn't true. I mean, it's not true that the Romans persecuted Christians. They were persecuting Jews, and they might have persecuted some Jews that were becoming Christians. But, Christianity they were pushing Christianity. They were trying to get rid of Judaism. Then Suetonius Tranquillus, too, historicized Nero's persecution with the mere statement that punishment was inflicted on the Christians, a new and mischievous superstition, quote, and elsewhere said that Emperor Claudius, 41 to 54 AD, had expelled the Jews from Rome for constantly making disturbances at the instigation of Chrestus. Unfortunately, Suetonius is the grandson of Arius Piso, so that's not to be taken seriously. That's also 2nd century. I mean, even if you are citing Josephus as, evidence of the existence of Jesus, he was writing a good 60 years after the so-called crucifixion. And he never shared the planet with Jesus. He was born 4 years after Jesus was said to have been crucified. So regardless, it's not a primary source. But even if you're talking about War of the Jews, he wrote this huge 7-volume book, War of the Jews, and Jesus was not mentioned in that. It wasn't until he wrote Antiquities of the Jews 20 years later that he mentions him. But regardless, this guy Josephus was actually Arius Piso, not a Jew who commanded the army, and that eventually was adopted into the Roman court by Vespasian, which is all enough to let you know what Josephus was all about, and to, completely invalidate anything that he says. But given that he says something that most Christians want to hear, they don't question it. Suetonius was historicizing the story appearing in Acts of the Apostles in 18 verse 2, that Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome, but perhaps he was hinting at the identity of him whom he was honoring with his account. For he deliberately this time misspelled the Christus name with an E instead of an I. Although he wrote in Latin, perhaps his intent was to make the spelling in Greek with the E, total in small numbering, therefore 26. Okay, I think we're out of time here. We will pick up again tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in today. Thanks.